Ah, Portugal. Those beautiful beaches, that great food, that low cost of living. But what about the cost to actually get here? In this video, we're going to break down the 6 major costs of moving to Portugal. And by the way, number 4 might just be a deal killer. If you're planning a move to Portugal or any other country, we encourage you to keep watching because at the end of this video, we're going to share our best tips to save you time and money in your move to Portugal.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Dawn.
And we're the unretirees. And last year, as I was approaching traditional retirement age, we realized that we didn't want to retire. But we also didn't want to put off our dream of living abroad and traveling the world either. So today we live and work as digital expats on the Silver Coast of Portugal. And this channel is about living abroad, remote work, and travel and adventure over 50.
We invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and hit that bell notification so you never miss a new video. We also have a weekly free newsletter. I'll leave a link in the description below if you'd like to sign up. Now, I feel like this video is kind of the scared straight of moving to Portugal, but this is really the information that we wish we had when we were planning our own move to Portugal last year.
That's right. There are a lot of videos that you can see out there that talk about the low cost of living in Portugal. You know, it's true. The cost of living in Portugal is lower than at least what we experience in the northeast of the United States. But the cost of moving to Portugal, well, that's a different story. So here are 6 main cost categories as you consider moving to Portugal.
So the first category is the visa application process. Now, we're going to share some numbers with you, but these numbers are subject to change. For example, we moved from the US. If you're moving from a different country, your costs will be different. Also, these costs can change at any time, and guidelines can also change at any time.
Based on our experience, and we went through this process in 2023, there are several steps and several costs related to actually getting your visa. So the first is that just in order to apply for your visa, you have to have a NIF, which is like a tax ID number here in Portugal. And you can get an NIF through a third party, for example, like Border, which is what we use, BORDR, and we'll leave a link below. You also need to have a bank account here in Portugal, and we'll talk about that in just a second, but Border can help you open up a bank account as well if you need that. We also needed to set an in-person appointment with an organization called VFS, who's the document collection company that works with the Portuguese government in order to process all of these visas. And just to make the in-person appointment, it was $60 per person in order to do that. And then part of the documents that we needed to provide to VFS in this was a FBI background check. And to get an FBI background check, we had to have fingerprints done. Combination of those costs for both of us was somewhere in the ballpark of $150. For a D7, you need to have proof of assets, and those proof of assets really needs to be a deposit into a Portuguese bank account, like you opened up earlier with Border. But for 2 people, it ends up being roughly 13,000 euros or $14,500 that you have to have in that account. It's your money. It doesn't go away, but you just have to have it in that Portuguese bank account. You also need to have a separate health insurance. That's a special health insurance that cost us about $400 for a 4-month policy. And then when you finally have your meeting with VFS, your in-person meeting, they have their own set of charges as you're handing over the documents. And for us, those sets of charges were about $325.
So keep in mind that these are all costs that you need to pay before you even have a visa approval, and they're non-refundable. And so that is a total of about $15,000 that you would need to have just to apply. Now, I just want to say that this was for a D7 visa. If you decide to come to Portugal on a digital nomad visa, then that upfront requirement is much different, and we have an entire video all about that, and we'll link that up here for you. But these are the costs just to apply for the visa.
So the next major cost area is travel. Now we think about travel in this context as two buckets. The first one is scouting trips and the other is transaction trips. And for scouting trips, look, there are some people that we have heard who moved to Portugal without ever having visited Portugal. But we planned to make 2 scouting trips as part of this. But things didn't go as planned, and we actually made 3.
So if you watched our video about choosing a home in a location, again, we'll link that here, then you know a little bit about these scouting trips already. Our first one was 4 days long, and we came out just to check out Portugal. Now, we had done a ton of research online. Portugal seemed to check every box, but we wanted to be here in person to really find out if Portugal felt like a great fit for us.
So the second scouting trip was really about house hunting. So having identified the specific areas and done a lot of research back in the United States of types of houses and working with a real estate agent, we came to Portugal with the specific intent of finding and putting an offer on a house, which we did do on this second scouting trip.
We did do that, and again, as we said, things did not exactly go according to plan. So we had planned a 10-day trip to come out and close on that house and furnish it. The day before we were supposed to get on the plane, the entire deal fell through. And so we decided to still get on the plane, come here for 10 days and look for another property.
So let's talk about the costs of those 3 scouting trips. So for flights, it cost from New York City, roughly a round trip flight for us was about $600 a person. So that's $1,200 just in flights. We made 3 trips, so that's $3,600.
Right, and we had 24 total days of scouting trips across the three trips, and we needed a car for all of that, and that was about $100 a day, including insurance. So that was $2,400. We also needed a place to stay, an average of about $100 a night for various hotels and Airbnbs, for a total of $2,300.
So the costs for our 3 scouting trips, for flights, car rental, and for accommodations, was about $8,300. And of course, there's meals, and there's gas and tolls, and there's airport parking that also would be on top of that. So, you know, it's just an estimate. And of course, if you were doing this, you may take fewer scouting trips, which of course would reduce the cost as well. But it was a lot of money, and that wasn't the end of our travel costs.
So the next category of travel is what we call transaction trips. And these are trips where they're not really scouting trips because we've already decided on Portugal, we found a property, but we were not yet ready to move here either. So these were just trips for things where we felt like we needed to be in Portugal. These are things like closing on the house and furnishing the house and getting it ready as a short-term rental.
So we ended up making 2 of these transaction trips. Now, the first of these transaction trips, which originally we thought was going to be the only transaction trip, was specifically to close on the house that we purchased, this house that we're in now. And because this house, as you know, as you may have seen from our previous video, there's a unit that we are in and then a unit above. And the fact is that we actually didn't move here for more than a year after we owned the house. We were intending to have both of these units ready as rentals, which meant that we had to furnish the thing from couches to corkscrews.
Right, and so for that trip, we had planned to be here for 30 days. Again, that was to close and to furnish, but again, things did not go exactly according to plan, and we weren't actually able to get into the house for about 2 weeks. And so what that meant is that we had 14 days to furnish 2 3-bedroom units from top to bottom. Now, that would have been ambitious if we were still in the US and knew exactly where and how to get everything we needed. We miss you, Target and Home Goods. But here in a new country, it was a lot more challenging. And there was another challenge as well, and that was that we only had 14 days left to furnish the property and to really come in and take measurements. And most of the delivery times were 14 days. So that meant that we really had to hustle to make a lot of decisions very quickly. And because of that, we were not able to finish both the top and the bottom unit. We got the bottom one furnished and ready to go, but we had to schedule another trip to come out and finish the top one because we wanted to make sure that that was ready to go. We were about to go into high season.
So let's talk about the costs of these 2 transaction trips. So the first trip, it cost $600 each, roughly, for us to fly back and forth from New York. So that's $1,200. We had a car that we rented for 30 days, so that was $3,000 about. And we unexpectedly had to stay in an Airbnb for 2 weeks. So that was about $1,400. So just for that first trip, it was about $5,600. But then we needed to come back for this second trip to finish furnishing the second of our units, the upstairs unit, to get it prepared for Airbnb. Well, that was another round trip ticket for each of us. So that is $1,200. We were here for 10 days for that. So that's $1,000 of car rental. Fortunately, we did not have to stay in an Airbnb or anything like that because we could stay right here in our home. But that second trip was $2,200 on top of it, all unplanned.
So the total cost for travel was $16,000.
Oh.
Now, fortunately, what we didn't really talk about is that we had built up a lot of points by this time, and we were able to cash those in to cover some of these costs. So we know it was expensive. It's probably not going to be this expensive for everyone, maybe not anyone, but we wanted to share these costs with you because we wanted to emphasize that moving to a new country means that anything can happen. There are unexpected things that will be out of your control, and to just plan for those because those can add up.
I can't wait for the comments on this. So the third major cost category that we're going to talk about is housing. When you move to a new country or you move to a place, you have a decision that you're going to make about whether you're going to buy a house or you're going to rent a house. And so we're going to talk just quickly here about renting a place, even though that's not what we did. As part of the visa process, you need to be able to demonstrate that you've got a place to live. And generally that is in the form of a lease. So this is where the risk of double paying for housing comes in.
So that means that you're actually paying rent on an apartment or a home here in Portugal before you actually even live here, and before you know that your visa is approved. Now, the visa approval process can take 1 month or 2 months. For us, it took 5 months. And so what that means is that you're paying for a home or an apartment that's sitting empty here in Portugal while you're waiting for your visa approval.
I've already probably done the math here because you are also paying a mortgage or paying rent where you live in the United States for that window of time. So you're paying here, you're paying in your home country as well as paying in Portugal. That double housing payment really hurts.
Right, and then you also have the deposit. The deposit can be up to 3 months of rent. And so let's just look at what that might look like if you were renting an apartment here for, say, $2,000 a month. It would be in euros, of course, but just to keep this example simple, let's use dollars. So you have an apartment or a home that you're renting for $2,000 a month. Let's say that your visa approval process takes 3 months. So you're paying $6,000 in deposits up front, and then you're paying another $6,000 in rent for an apartment or a home that you're not actually using. On top of that, you also are paying utilities. Now, these will probably be minimal if nobody is living there, but let's just say that that's $50 a month. So that means that for a total, before you even get here to Portugal, that you have paid $12,150 for that rental.
So if you decide to buy a property instead of rent a property, there are, of course, a different set of costs. So the first cost has to do with actually the down payment, or if you're buying cash, of course, you just have to have enough cash to purchase the house. But from a down payment standpoint, if you're buying it before you have your visa approved and you're not yet a full resident of Portugal, the banks typically are going to require 25 to 30% down. And then on top of it, you have closing costs. And it's a little bit different than at least in our home country, the United States, but closing costs can range anywhere from 3% to 10%. And it depends on the value of the house that you are buying. And that's because the biggest chunk of that amount has to do with the transfer tax called IMT, which can be 0 to 1% if you're buying a place that's 101,000 euros or less. Or it can be 7.5% of the value of the property if you're buying a house that's 1.1 million euros or above.
And just a reminder that those costs can change at any time, but there's even more to consider. If you're buying a home here in Portugal, then there's also repairs, replacements, and renovations to think about. So in our case, when we got here, there were repairs that we had to make pretty immediately after we closed to the exterior. We made the decision to have the entire interior repainted, and we also paid to upgrade a water heater.
If you own a home back in your home country, you're going to probably either sell it or make it a rental property, and there's preparation work that you need to do there. There may be some repairs or updating that you need to do. In our case, we were going to put it on as a short-term rental, so there were things that we needed to update and work on before we could do that, as well as some furnishings that we needed to buy. So you'd have to be prepared for some expenses as it relates to the property back in your home country before you move as well.
So the other cost is furnishing costs. And as I mentioned earlier, this might be a deal breaker because it's actually really expensive. Now, if you buy or rent a home that is fully furnished, fantastic. You can skip this expense. But typically, there are two types of furnishing costs when people move to Portugal. The first one is shipping costs, and the second one is replacement costs.
So let's talk about shipping costs, which shipping stuff to Portugal, it's expensive. Now, we chose not to do that, but we know a lot of people who shipped household goods, some household goods, or a whole lot of household goods from their home country here to Portugal. And it can range from $2,000 to $20,000 or perhaps even more depending on how much stuff you're bringing. And just to sort of get an idea, we are familiar with one person who spent around $7,000 to have a 20-foot container shipped over here, which took 4 or 5 weeks.
So the other option is replacement costs. Because shipping is so expensive, especially from the US to Portugal, many expats opt to replace items instead of shipping them. Now, that's not true of everyone. We know plenty of people who have their items shipped over, but it is one option. Now, a little bit about our story, which you may know if you've been watching for a little while, is that we had given away or sold 90% of everything that we owned. We talked about that in our decluttering video, and in our Airbnb video, we talked about leaving all of our items at our property in the US to set it up for short-term rental. And as we said earlier, this was 2 3-bedroom units, top to bottom, that had to be furnished with absolutely everything.
That's right. So in this place here in Portugal, a couple of units, roughly 2,000, a little over 2,000 square feet, 6 bedrooms, 2 kitchens, 2 living rooms, 2 dining rooms, everything that you need. So not only furniture, but all the kitchen equipment and coffee maker and, you know, all the stuff. What's that?
Linens.
Linens, so many linens, right? You have 6 bedrooms, so you need to have multiple sets of linens and multiple sets of towels. So it all adds up, and we spent between $12,000 and $15,000 furnishing both units combined.
So the next category of costs are moving costs, what it costs to actually get here. So here's a breakdown. We spent about $600 on one-way flights for both of us. We spent $300 to check additional bags since we didn't ship anything and we took everything with us. We sold our car in the US about a week before we moved here, so we needed to rent a car in the US for our final week. Cost of that, $600. We also needed to rent a car for 2 weeks here in Portugal until we had a chance to buy one. Cost of that, $1,400. We also needed to move our dog, Riley. The cost of this was $1,200. Now, there were a lot of steps to moving a dog, and if you want more information about that, let us know in the comments, and we'll do a video about that. But total moving costs to get us here, both of us and our dog, were $4,100.
So the 6th category of expenses has to do with a car. Now, if you move to Lisbon or Porto, you may decide that you don't want a car, and that would make a lot of sense. But for us on the Silver Coast and for a lot of people in different parts of Portugal, a car just is something that they need. And you have 2 choices. One is that you can ship a car from your home country, and the other choice is that you can buy a car here, whether it's new or used.
Now, the first option is to ship the car. What does that cost? How long does that take? Well, according to the website of BR Logistics, a company that moves cars, they say the average price to ship a car from the USA to Portugal ranges from $1,150 to $2,850, and the duties to import a car to Portugal from the United States are 11% duty and 21% VAT of the value of the vehicle, plus $1,500 for local charges in Portugal. Now, keep in mind that these are only starting prices. The actual price may be more. We're going to leave a link to that article in the description below. It contains a lot of interesting information about shipping a car from the US to Portugal. But keep in mind that there's also a time frame to consider. So shipping a car from the US to Portugal can take 20 to 40 days or more. So if you're in Portugal and you need a car, you may have the additional expense of renting a car until your car arrives.
So if you decide that you're going to buy a car, that can be expensive too, because cars here in Portugal are just more expensive than they are in the United States, certainly. And this is if it's a new car, which is defined as a car that's under 6 months old or less than 6,000 kilometers. There's a value-added tax that's applied there of 23%, which is makes a car be very expensive. But even used cars are quite expensive here. We have found that used cars generally are about 10% more expensive here than for the exact same kind of car back in the United States.
So something to keep in mind is that most cars here in Portugal are manual transmission. And so if it's important to you to have an automatic transmission, that will cost more. And also automatic transmissions are typically only available in mid-range to luxury range cars. It's very difficult to find an automatic transmission when you're buying a car towards the more economy end. If you plan to move to Portugal and maybe finance a car like you would in the United States, I believe we don't have the facts on this, fact check this, but our understanding is that you actually need to be a resident of Portugal. That process can take 3 to 6 months, and that's to get financing through a bank. So you may have additional costs. If you want to wait to finance, you'll have additional costs for car rentals, public transportation, or something like that. Just some things to consider.
So those are the 6 categories of costs related to moving to Portugal. Hope we didn't scare you too much, but let's talk about some of the things that we've learned, or maybe some tips that we would have for others who would be in this situation. And the first has to do with research. You can research online. You can watch a lot of YouTube videos about this. You can go online and identify the various costs of things that you may need. You can join Facebook groups. There's a Facebook group called Americans and Friends PT, which is designed really to help people who are moving from the United States to Portugal to do it as seamlessly as possible. And there's lots of great information and research there. But one of the other things that's important to research is trying to research the areas that you want to be in and research the kind of properties that you want to go see, in order to reduce the number of scouting trips that you come on. In fact, some people don't do scouting trips. That seems awfully risky to us. I think we would need to do at least one. But if you can do a scouting trip and be successful at finding a place in that scouting trip, it saves a lot of money.
Yeah, I feel like we say all the time, research, 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 and that's true. But even the best researcher, that will only get you so far. We definitely recommend planning for the unexpected in your budget. If we had to do this process over again, we probably would have added about 20% to account for additional unexpected costs and glitches that can occur along the way.
So one other tip is to plan based on your situation. I mean, we knew that we were planning to be in Portugal for the long term. And if we had instead just thought we were going to be in Portugal just to try it out or for a short term, we would have rented instead of buying a place. We would have rented a furnished place instead of buying a bunch of furniture. We would live somewhere where we didn't need a car. And if we needed a car, we could just rent a car for that window of time. So you would just, the advice here is just to plan according to your specific situation.
Yeah, everybody has different goals, and so the investment that you make has to be appropriate for what you want to get out of the experience of living abroad. The other thing that I would say is to budget on actual numbers. I think for a lot of these things, we relied on a range. We knew that things could be a little more or a little less expensive than we thought, but I would say to get as many exact quotes as early in the process as you can. If you don't plan to move to Portugal for 6 months, I would say still talk to your veterinarian today, get those shipping quotes, get the costs for deposits, leases, all of that. put together a budget that is as fine-tuned as possible up front. You're still going to need some just in case budgeting for things that will not go according to plan. But I would say put those numbers together as detailed as you can, as early as you can.
Yeah, those just in case numbers, I mean, we even blew that budget. And
We did.
it was quite a lot more expensive than we anticipated it being. And I think one of the things that you have to keep in mind is, you're moving to Portugal, perhaps in part because it's a lower cost country. And it is a lower cost country. But the costs of moving, it may take you a few years to recoup those costs through the lower cost of living here in Portugal. So now that we're on the other side of it, now that we're here in Portugal, was it worth it?
Well, to find out, watch this next video about our first impressions after living in Portugal for 6 months. Duties to import a car to Portugal from the United States are 11%.
Duties?
Yes. So let's look at that first option, which is duties. I can't do it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll make it work this time, I promise.